Issue 2, it's the oil, stupid.
Everyone knows that the war against Iraq was about oil. This administration is trying to gain control of Iraq's oil with the help of Congress.
Don't laugh. Dennis Kucinich, Democratic presidential candidate and congressman from Ohio, is not the only one connecting the U.S. and Iraq's oil. Also, the former commander of U.S. forces in the Middle East, John Abizaid, had this to say about Iraq's oil. I'm not saying this is a war for oil, but I am saying that oil fuels an awful lot of geopolitical moves that political powers may have there. Kucinich and Abizaid were echoing what Alan Greenspan, former chairman of the Federal Reserve, has already stated. I am saddened that it is politically inconvenient to acknowledge what everyone knows. The Iraq War is largely about oil. The oil in Iraq's reserves is one of the largest in the world. It's estimated that 300 billion barrels sit beneath the Iraqi desert, more than even Saudi Arabia. Who controls it? If Iraq's parliament passes its oil law, designed by the Bush administration, American companies would get access to 63 of Iraq's 80 known oil fields for 30 years. And that's ownership of the oil. This, of course, means that the U.S. will have enduring military super bases in Iraq, as both Defense Secretary Robert Gates and President Bush have renamed them. With South Korea as the model, where the U.S. still today has a presence more than 50 years after the end of the Korean War. The Pentagon now has 4, quote-unquote, super bases in Iraq. The largest, an air base in Balad, is the size of a small town. Tom Rick, author of the Iraq bestseller Fiasco, reported in the Washington Post. The Balad Air Base is heavily trafficked. We're second only to Heathrow, an Air Force general told Rick. These super bases, not to mention the Pentagon-scale U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, which handles a staff of over 1,000, mean that a complete pullout of U.S. forces is off the table. In effect, the United States has acquired a protectorate with $30 trillion in oil wealth, practically guaranteed geopolitical hegemony, and inexpensive gasoline for the U.S.
Question, in an era of $100 per barrel oil, is access to Iraq's oil brilliant foresight on the part of Messrs. Bush and Cheney? Was there a method to their madness after all? Eleanor Cliff.
I think oil was a quarter or a fifth as expensive when Bush took office before the invasion.
Well,
so I don't think you can make
that's
a
a hiatus.
that this is brilliant.
I mean, when we get the Iraq oil, it'll be $1 a gallon.
Look, we're in that region because we're protecting a strategic reserve that we're addicted to. I remember former Secretary of State James Baker during the first Persian Gulf War, when he had this evolving set of reasons why we were going into the region. Oil was one of them, and he discovered that didn't resonate well with American people. Don't like to think that we're spending soldiers' lives for oil. But it's an element. We wouldn't be there if oil wasn't part of the equation.
It's interesting that you said that. Aside from the fact that all of those reserves are in the ground, what else makes Iraq oil so attractive? Let's see how good you are. Try to redeem yourself.
Well, it's going to be difficult competing with this novel McLaughlin, Kucinich, Greenspan strategic analytical alliance here, rife with conspiracy.
Work with it.
Look, the ultimate problem is consumption in the U.S. and coming down the pike, consumption in China and India. Our consumption has gone up from 17 to 21 million barrels a day since about 15 years ago. Even though China is now consuming just a third of what we consume, they're ratcheting it up. And if they go, and India goes at the same pace, It doesn't matter if we have total control of that oil. We are ultimately going to have to come to terms with the need to be a little smarter about consumption.
Yeah, we got your point. Monica.
$100 a barrel for oil. Yeah, we're doing a great job about controlling the world market price by going into Iraq. It's ridiculous. I agree with Eleanor. We ought to be a lot more honest about at least one of the motivations for going into Iraq. The United States of America does not commit its resources in blood and treasure to strategically insignificant parts of the world. So of course oil was part of it. Wasn't the only reason, wasn't even the biggest reason. But the fact that the Iraq government is still such a disaster area where they can't even get their own oil out of the ground, and we're doing the best we can to help them do that. The idea that somehow the United States then could compete with the Russians and the Saudis in the world marketplace is crazy.
I'm going to answer my own earlier question. The value of Iraq oil, besides the fact so much of it is in the ground, the volume of it, is the fact it can be floated. You can float it away on boats and bring it in that way. There's not a lot of the world's oil that is susceptible of doing that. Exit question. Pat, you work with this and get your other point in. Can we declare with certainty that the true cause of the Iraq war was oil?
No.
Yes or no?
No, we would not have gone into Iraq if oil were not there and important. But Bush went into Iraq for 3 reasons. Hubris, John, ideology, and geostrategic interests. He saw an American opportunity after the big victory in Afghanistan to impose America's ideas and ideology and power on the vital region of the world. He was going to be Winston Churchill.
Was it edible?
Was it edible?
Oedipal.
O-E-D.
O-E-D.
Ancient Greece.
Oedipal. Was it Oedipal?
No, for his father. You mean he was going in to do what his father failed to good. No, I wouldn't say that about Miss Barbara Bush, John.
Transforming the region into democratic states was an afterthought. The original reason was to topple Saddam, which looked easy, and away to outdo his father. It was edible.
In 2002, there was a Strategic Defense Initiative paper. Do you remember that? Strategic Defense?
National Security Strategy.
Right,
document.
National Security Strategy. Good, Pat. You're good for that small bore stuff. Now,
small point.
that said that the United States would never surrender its #1 status in the world, no matter what happened. You remember that?
Right.
We would maintain that notwithstanding anything. We're #1 and we'll be the only one who's #1. It was that kind of bravado, okay? Now, in order to be #1, you really have to have oil. Oil is an absolute necessity for it in today's world. Therefore, arguing logically, can you say that our reason for going into this war was oil?
The national security report that you're talking about was also pre-9/11, so I'm not disagreeing with you, John, but I'm saying that the oil was one component of a bigger picture post-9/11, which included...
Was it the dominant component?
It was, I would say, probably about 50-50, the other half of which was the nature of Saddam Hussein's regime and the idea that they could possess weapons of mass destruction in a post-9/11 world.
Yeah, but they knew before they went in, did they not, Pat? That there were no weapons? No, they didn't know. They didn't know.
They were told.
I guess they thought they were. No intelligence on the ground.
El Baradei said there are no nuclear weapons, and the inspectors had found no WMD.
Right, and they chose not to believe that.
With apologies to your new ideological soulmates, Dennis Kucinich and Alan Greenspan, no, I don't even think it was 50-50. I think it was first and foremost Saddam, maybe 70-30.
Do you know whether or not Kucinich is calling for the impeachment of the president? We know that he is.
He's going for Cheney,
he's got
too.
22 co-signers. What?
He went for Cheney. I think he's going for Bush,
he's
too.
going for Cheney first, I think.
Is that because he thinks we entered Iraq because of oil?
He thinks we were lied into the war. That's what he claims that Cheney did.
I think that you're pretty close to the mark, maybe a little higher, 50-50. I'd say it was about 40% oil going into Iraq.